Hi everyone, my name is Lily. I am from the United States in San Diego, California, and today I'm going to be going over heredity, which is a pretty interesting unit. It's one of the most interesting units in biology that there is, and so I'm really excited to give you guys a brief overview of the lesson. Okay, so let's first have a recap of the previous days in the week. So Mondays, we explored somatic and sex cells. Tuesday, the process of sexual reproduction. Wednesday, genes and traits. And then finally on Thursday, we looked at some syndromes and error in reproduction. So first, let's begin with reviewing cells, specifically somatic and sex cells. So overall, cells are little subunits of life. They make us up. They're the smallest structural unit in life, and they carry out different functions in your body. Cells are super important. And basic cell theory says that all living things are composed of cells. Cells are the basic unit of all organisms, and all cells arise from pre-existing cells. Now, this third point we need to really emphasize because this deals with mitosis, which is what we learned this week. Okay, so as I mentioned previously, each cell carries out a specific function of life. This may include replication, respiration, or breathing in and out, transport, and protection against disease. Our immune system fights off disease, and that's really important. So we need cells to survive. If there weren't any cells, we wouldn't even be an organism. We wouldn't be who we are right now. We're all made up of cells. And this gets us to DNA. So recall that DNA contains all of our genes and code for our traits. And so our genes are what make us unique. I have brown hair, maybe you might have darker hair or lighter hair. We might look different, and that's because of our genes. So yeah, we all look really different from each other, right? And this is because there are differences in our DNA. And so let's get into some vocabulary in genetics. An allele refers to a gene for a specific trait. This can mean your hair color, your eye shape, etc. And remember how DNA is located in the cellular nucleus, the control center of the cell? Inside of the nucleus, the DNA is organized into chromosomes. So over here we have a cell and then there's a nucleus. Then over here we have a chromosome, right? Then here's our strand of DNA. And each section of DNA here is considered a gene. And if we're referring to a gene that codes for a specific trait like hair color or eye color, we call this an allele. And so during sexual reproduction, our parents' chromosomes are passed on to us. And the variation, what makes us different from both of our parents, are the combinations of DNA. So depending on how the DNA is combined, we're going to have a mix of our parents' features, and we're not going to look like exact clones of our parents. And this is the advantage of sexual reproduction. It gives us diversity in life. And so, what exactly are somatic cells? Well, somatic cells are any body cells except for the sperm and egg cells. So these are all your body cells, excluding any reproductive cells. And we call somatic cells diploid. So this means that the cell contains two sets of chromosomes from each parent, right? You have your mother's set of chromosomes, the maternal set, and your father's set, the paternal set. And so this just means that one chromosome set is from your mother and the other set is from your father. And over here, you see that some somatic cells are your kidney cells, liver, bone cells, your lung cells, blood cells, heart cells, muscle cells, and your pancreas. So these are all somatic cells in your body. Next, we're going to get into sex cells. So sex cells are reproductive cells, and these are called gametes. So in males, they have sperm cells. Females have ova or egg cells. And these sexual cells, they are haploid, which means that they contain one set of chromosomes. So in this little diagram here, we have an egg cell, and then over here we have a sperm cell. And during sexual reproduction, these two come together. And this creates a diploid cell, like our normal body cells, because we have the maternal set combining with the paternal set, right? So the mother's chromosomes combine with the father's chromosomes, which restores the diploid nature. Okay, and now that we know somatic and sex cells, we can talk about cell division. So, briefly, mitosis is just a division of our body cells. It plays a major role in the growth and repair of cells. If it weren't for mitosis, we wouldn't be able to grow and our cells would not be able to replace. During mitosis, it produces two genetically identical diploid cells. So, these cells are pretty much clones of each other, right? And that's really important. And the main processes that occur during mitosis is first the interphase and then PMAT. And PMAT involves prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. So over here is the interphase where DNA replication happens and your cell is preparing to replicate. So it's sort of preparing. So DNA replication happens and your cell is just making sure it has enough nutrients and resources to reproduce. Next is the prophase, where the nuclear envelope starts disintegrating, your chromosomes condense, and then the little centrosomes with the spindles attach to your DNA. So this is when it starts attaching. The metaphase is when your spindles move the chromosomes into the center of the cell. And this happens over here. So prometaphase is when everything is getting attached. And then the actual metaphase, the M and PMAT, is when your spindles align those chromosomes into the center of the cell so that everything can split and everything is nice and organized. Then after that, in the anaphase, your centromeres are going to pull apart those cells or those chromosomes. Those chromosomes are going to be pulled apart. And then during the telophase, your cells start to cleave, meaning that it starts to separate and the nuclear envelope reforms, and then cytokinesis happens where the cytoplasm splits. And then at the very end, you have two separate cells. So that's pretty much mitosis in a nutshell. Now let's get into meiosis. So basically it's a really similar process to mitosis, except in meiosis, it divides twice. There are two cell divisions that happen. And as a result, the sperm and egg cells are produced. And one key thing to remember is that half of the chromosomes are left over, right? And you have genetically different daughter cells or final cells, and these are all haploid because it divides twice. It only makes sense for it to happen that way, right? Because if you divide again, right, you're going to get four cells. So over here, you have this first division, and in this division, it's really important to notice that these chromosomes, they're not going to be like separated, right? The chromosomes itself, but like little structure, like this little structure here. See how it stays here? It's just that these split into separate cells. They become separated. And then over here, you have those chromatids. And so how are these all genetically different? Well, this comes from the fact that there are some things that go on in meiosis that don't happen in mitosis. So these cells can cross over, which means that they can sort of overlap and swap their DNA fragments together to create new combinations. And remember, genetic differences comes from new combinations, new DNA combinations. And so yeah, the main difference between meiosis and mitosis that you should remember is that meiosis produces four haploid cells that are all genetically different, right? They're not the same because the processes are slightly different. And meiosis undergoes two sets of division. And so here's a comparison. Teachers, you may pause over here and look over the diagram. So with your students, see how mitosis splits once over here, and then meiosis splits twice and produces genetically different cells. Like over here, I think this picture better shows how the DNA pieces are swapped. Like over here, notice that in this blue chromosome, there are some orange fragments, and in this orange chromosome, there are some blue fragments. So this means that those two little chromosomes came together and swapped some DNA pieces so that it can mix and match and create new combinations. So this is why all of your resulting daughter cells are slightly different. Okay, this brings us into reproduction, and I'm going to just basically go over just the basics of reproduction. So first, I'm going to actually introduce to you guys asexual reproduction, which produces offspring that are genetically identical to the parent. And so these offspring are pretty much clones of their parents, and there are multiple types. So the first one is fission, and bacteria do this all the time. It's basically when they separate into two cells. You can think of this as mitosis. And so see over here in this picture, that's bacteria separating into two identical cells. The next form of asexual reproduction is budding. So this plant is a hydra. And over here, there's another hydra plant growing out of it. This is called budding. And then soon they're going to split off from each other, and you have two new plants, right? Because this is asexual reproduction. The next form is from fragmentation. So we have a starfish, and when the starfish loses a piece of its leg over here, when it fragments, they start to regenerate. So this starfish starts to regenerate, and this leg starts to also regenerate into a new starfish. So this is pretty funky and weird, but yeah, the parent cell or starfish breaks in, starts to regenerate, and so does its broken piece. And then the last one is parthenogenesis, and during this process, an offspring can develop without fertilization. Yeah, you heard me right. There needs to be no fertilization for this um, this new offspring to form. And this is the case for honeybees. And so for drones, the male bees are a result of non-fertilization. So when no sexual reproduction happens, a drone is formed. But when fertilization does happen, or when sexual reproduction takes place, then the result is a female bee. So that's pretty interesting, right? And then this gets us to sexual reproduction. And so unlike or asexual reproduction, reproduction creates variation. So during sexual reproduction, the sperm fertilizes the egg cell. What we mean by fertilize is when the sperm comes in contact with the egg cell. See over here, this is an egg cell, and here is a little sperm. And over here, both cells, or the sperm sort of injects its chromosomes or its genetic material into the egg cell, and both haploid cells combine. So now as a result, we have a diploid cell. And the resulting offspring is genetically different from both parents because remember, different combinations, different traits, and more variety. And variation is really important because it's in a rapidly changing environment, variation results in greater reproductive success. And we might not really know what this means so far, but we're going to explore this more in the coming weeks. We're going to learn why variation is super important. But for now, know that variation is super important in an environment that is rapidly changing. But we'll see that in more detail in the coming weeks. Now, this gets us into the reproductive system. And basically, the main difference is the reproductive organs look completely different. So in males, they have this structure, and then over here is the female with the uterus. And from your activity, you should have learned about both parts of them and labeling each of the parts. So I have this picture up for a little review of the reproductive system. And next, this gets us into the final activity content, which is with the reproductive heir. And so mutations are changes in the DNA sequences. Those are in essence what a mutation is. And this affects our genes and our traits. So mutations, they give rise to variety, and they can either be advantageous or disadvantageous. And so some mutations are good. Some, not all of them are bad, but other ones may sort of hinder your body's functioning, and they can be pretty bad. But any mutation that happen within sex cells, now that leads to variation. So that's what you have to sort of keep in mind, right? So during reproduction, if you have a cell that is mutated or has some different DNA, then you have a different trait. And so that's where most of the variety comes from. In different types of different within the species. And so we could also have mutations in chromosomes, and this could lead to genetic disorders. So in your activity, you guys explore Down syndrome, Turner syndrome, Klinefelter syndrome, and Craig-Duchat. And here are the main different types of reproductive errors. So deletion, so say this is our original chromosome. A deletion happens when a segment is just completely cut out by some error. A duplication is when a set is duplicated. So see B segment, it's added. See, there's two of them because it's been duplicated. Inversion is when the pieces sort of, the order gets all messed up. So something happens, like there's like a misfolding in the chromosome and then the order switches up. So it should be A, B, C, D, E, F, but over here, the fragments have switched. So the C, B, and then this F part combined, and over here this D, E, and then like this A part combined. So it's sort of switched around. And then over here, translocation is when two chromosomes sort of intermingle and then their pieces switch up. So see over here, these two are switching up, and that's a translocation. Now, this is onto our activity. Today we have I had a pretty fun activity planned. You guys get to design your own baby with a coin toss. And so you can either partner up if you're in class right now and do this with a partner, and like each partner gets like one coin, or you can do this by yourself and flip two coins. So in America, this is a penny, and in like for a penny, we have one side with heads and then the other side, we call this tails. And so maybe your coins look slightly different. For this activity, you'll need just two coins. And so for here, I'm going to just call this heads, right? The side with the face is my heads. Let me show you guys. So this with the face is the heads, this one's the tails. And heads represents the dominant allele. And remember, dominant alleles are the alleles that mask over the recessive alleles. So tails will be the recessive. And so, like, let's say I flip a coin, right? And then I got two heads. Do you guys remember what the term you use to refer to a trait that has both the same allele? We call it homozygous, right? Because there's two dominant alleles. That means that the trait is going to be the dominant trait, the one with the capital. So these are the dominant is like the capital letter that you're going to write. Now let's say I flip again, and like let's say when I flip I get two over here. These are both tails and they're both the recessive allele. And so this means that the recessive trait actually shows up in the organism because there's no dominant allele, masking it. So these recessive alleles, they're going to produce the recessive traits. And this is what we call homozygous recessive. Now, if we have one heads and one tails, we have dominant and recessive. This means that this is a heterozygous organism. So this is heterozygous, meaning that there are two different alleles, right? Different allele from the mother and different allele from the father. And this would, in complete dominance, the dominant trait is going to show through. So if, let's say for one of the examples, you have like either a round face or a square face. If you have something that is heterozygous, and let's say that the dominant trait is a round face, that means that the child will have a round face. So yeah, if you have at least one dominant trait. If both are dominant, still going to be a round face. The only way you could get a square face, the recessive trait, is if both of these are tails. So if both of these are the recessive allele. And then you'll see that for certain traits, this breaks the rule, and it's known as incomplete dominance. So you'll see that on your sheet, there'll be, for some of the traits, there are three options, right? And so this would mean that the heterozygous has a completely different trait, like an average, like the medium. Like let's say you were doing eye size, two heads, like both dominant, will give you big eyes. Two recessive alleles are going to give you small eyes, and if you have one dominant and one recessive, this is going to give you a medium shape. And this is called incomplete dominance, when one trait isn't exactly dominant over the other. There's so many different cases that happen in genetics, and so I want to expose you guys to all the different ones. And another one just one more we need to go over is polyploidy, and this means that the trait is determined by multiple genes. So for skin color, you'll see that there's there are A genes, B genes, and C genes. And so this means you're going to do a coin flip with your partner or by yourself 3 different times, right? And so you'll record it in a little table, the result, and the skin color is based on how many capital letters there are, because each allele represents pigmentation. And so that's what I need you guys to know. And that might be a little confusing, so I wanted to explain it to you guys. And then when you get to The other one was eye color. For eye color, it's also another case where multiple genes control the trait, and so you'll have to do the coin flip twice for that one. And so, yeah, those are some of the cases. Of course, in real life, it's way more complicated than the activity, but for our purposes, the activity is a good way to model how inheritance work and how we get our traits from our parents, right? So remember, each allele, one from the mother, one from the father. This represents like the egg and the sperm coming together, right? And then mixing the traits. And one more thing that I want you guys to know is you can look at genetics like a coin toss, because genetics can be super random, you know? Like the traits that are determined can be super, super random. There's no like one law that says, oh, like you're gonna go with this trait and that trait. It's just random chance. It's just chance and probability. So, like a coin toss, genetics is very much like chance and probability. And so I hope you guys have a lot of fun with this activity. I've done it before and I know that I had a lot of fun doing it. And so, yeah, have fun with this activity. And then you'll have some questions at the end of your activity to answer. And that's pretty much all I have for you. So, thank you so much for listening to the lesson. I hope you learned a lot and have a really, really nice day. Bye, everyone.